My parents didn't come to my wedding. Yeah, I know, that sounds bad on paper, and trust me, it was worse in reality. But it's not just that they weren't there. It was why they weren't there, and how little it seemed to matter to them. It's like they saw my wedding as an imposition, something beneath their— I'm struggling to find the right word that isn't profanity— beneath their consideration. My fiancé, now my wife, God, that still feels surreal in a good way. Amelia is the most incredible woman I've ever known. She's the kind of person who sees the best in everyone, even when they don't deserve it. She's smart, compassionate, and has this uncanny ability to make me laugh even when I feel like the world is collapsing. She's also the reason I even considered inviting my parents in the first place. See, I don't have the kind of storybook relationship with my parents that you read about in those Ada threads. You know, the ones where the parents are showering the OP with love, paying for everything, and generally being supportive angels. That's not my reality. My parents, Arthur and Vivian, have never been my biggest cheerleaders, more like distant observers, occasionally offering unsolicited advice with a side of passive aggression. Growing up, it was always clear that my younger brother, Leo, was the golden child. Everything he did was brilliant, hilarious, and worthy of praise. He could trip over his own feet, and my mom would gush about his unique sense of balance. Meanwhile, I could get straight A's, and the response would be a perfunctory, "Well, that's what's expected." I tried to tell myself it didn't matter. I focused on academics, extracurriculars, anything to fill the void of their indifference. I told myself that their lack of affection wouldn't define me, that I could build a successful life regardless. But the truth is, it did matter. Every accomplishment, every milestone, was tinged with a bitter question. Would they finally notice me now? Would they finally care? When Amelia and I got engaged, a tiny spark of hope flickered within me. Maybe, just maybe, this would be the turning point. A chance for them to see me as more than just the responsible one, the one who doesn't need help. Amelia, bless her heart, encouraged me to extend the invitation. "It's a chance, Daniel," she said, her eyes shining with that trademark optimism. "A chance to show them what they're missing. Maybe you can start fresh." My gut screamed, "Don't do it. You're setting yourself up for disappointment." But Amelia's optimism was infectious, and, let's be honest, a part of me desperately wanted to believe her. So, I extended the olive branch. I invited them. I even called them first, before sending the formal invitation. My mom's tone was neutral, almost bored. As I stumbled through explaining how much it would mean to have them there, she just made non-committal sounds. Okay, we'll see." My dad, as usual, said next to nothing. Just a few grunts that could have meant anything from agreement to indigestion. Despite the lack of enthusiasm, I sent the invitation. I made sure it was beautiful, elegant, and detailed every carefully planned element. I wanted them to feel included, to know that this wasn't just a formality. It was a genuine invitation to share in my happiness. Then, silence. Weeks passed. No RSVP. No questions about the venue. Not even a casual, "How's the planning going, son?" It was like I had sent the invitation into a black hole. I tried to rationalize it. They were busy, they were traveling, they were something. But as the weeks stretched on, the familiar sinking feeling in my gut grew stronger. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I had to know. I decided to call them again. That conversation, that's burned into my memory. It's a raw, ugly scar on what should have been a time of pure joy. I'll tell you about that in the next part. But trust me, it didn't go the way I'd hoped. Not even close. The second phone call. God, just thinking about it makes my stomach clench. I knew I was setting myself up for heartache, but I still dialed the number. Hope is a stubborn beast, I guess. I paced back and forth in our tiny apartment, the cordless phone glued to my ear. Amelia was at work, which was probably for the best. I didn't want her to witness the inevitable train wreck. My mom answered after what felt like an eternity. "Hello?" Her voice was flat, devoid of any warmth. "Hey, Mom, it's Daniel." I tried to sound casual, but my nerves were practically vibrating. "Oh, hi." The silence that followed was heavy enough to suffocate me. Did you get the wedding invitation?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "Yes, Daniel, we got it. I just wanted to check if you and Dad were coming. Another pause. An even longer, more agonizing pause. Then, a sigh. A long, dismissive sigh that said more than any words could. We haven't decided yet, she said finally, her voice carefully neutral. Haven't decided? The RSVP date was last week. Well, she drawled, the venue isn't exactly what we expected, and the date isn't very convenient for us. We're so busy, you know? I wanted to scream. The venue was a beautiful garden, intimate and romantic, exactly what Amelia and I had always dreamed of. And the date? We had meticulously checked with everyone in the family to ensure it worked for them. Everyone except, apparently, my parents. It's about Amelia and me, Mom, I said, struggling to keep my voice from shaking. It's not about the location or the date. It's about celebrating our love. Well, she said, her voice taking on a sharp edge. You didn't ask for our input, did you? You just went ahead and planned everything without consulting us. Consulting you? I called you. I told you all about it. You didn't seem to care. The words burst out of me before I could stop them. She huffed. Don't get dramatic, Daniel. We just haven't decided yet. We'll let you know. And that was it. She hung up. Just like that. Leaving me standing there, phone clutched in my hand, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. I told Amelia that night. She held my hand in quiet support, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and understanding. She knew my relationship with my parents was complicated, but I don't think she fully grasped the depth of their indifference. It'll be okay, she said, squeezing my hand. We'll have a beautiful wedding, even if they're not there. We'll focus on the people who do care about us. Her words were comforting, but the sinking feeling in my chest wouldn't go away. This wasn't over. I knew it. A few more days crawled by. Still no RSVP. I tried to distract myself with wedding plans, but the silence was deafening. I told myself to let it go, to focus on the people who were excited to celebrate with us. But deep down, I couldn't. I needed closure. I needed to understand. So, I called again. This time, I hoped to talk to my dad. Maybe he could offer some sort of explanation, some sort of something. He answered on the third ring, his voice as detached as ever. Hello? Dad, it's Daniel. Yeah, hi. After some strained small talk about the weather and his golf game, I finally broached the subject. So, about the wedding, I began tentatively. We're not coming, he said bluntly, cutting me off before I could even finish my sentence. The words hit me like a physical blow. They stole the air from my lungs and left me gasping for breath. Why? I managed to ask, my voice tight. We just don't think it's worth the effort, he said casually, as if he were talking about skipping a neighborhood barbecue. It's not exactly a big deal, is it? Not a big deal? My wedding, the biggest day of my life. Not important enough for them? What do you mean? I asked, trying to keep the emotion out of my voice. He sighed, a sound that spoke volumes about his lack of patience. You know how it is, Daniel. Leo's events feel special. Yours are just, well, different. There it was, the unspoken truth that had hung over my entire life. I wasn't as important to them as Leo. They didn't even bother hiding it anymore. I hung up shortly after, too stunned to keep talking. That evening, I told Amelia what happened. She was furious, absolutely incandescent with rage on my behalf, but instead of letting it consume her, she channeled all her energy into making me feel supported. We'll have a beautiful wedding without them, she said, her voice firm, because the people who matter will be there. Her words gave me some comfort, but the pain lingered. I had always known I was second to Leo, but hearing it so plainly, so callously, still cut deeper than I expected. After a restless night filled with fragmented dreams and a heavy sense of dread, I decided to make one last attempt. Maybe I had caught my dad at a bad moment. Maybe they didn't understand how much this wedding meant to me. Maybe there was still a chance to salvage something. I called my mom again, hoping for a different outcome, praying for a sliver of empathy. She answered after a few rings, her voice already carrying that edge of impatience that always set my teeth on edge. What is it now, Daniel? I skipped the pleasantries. I couldn't handle any more of the superficial niceties. I just want to know why, I said, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts to stay composed. Why won't you come to my wedding? Why is this such a big deal to you? Why is this such a big deal to you? She shot back, her tone defensive. We're busy, Daniel. The venue is far. The date isn't convenient. And honestly, we don't feel like it's something we need to be there for. You don't need to be there? My voice cracked, betraying my mounting despair. She sighed, like I was exhausting her, like I was being deliberately difficult. Look, your brother is the one we're closer to, she said, her voice laced with that familiar, casual cruelty. We've always been honest about that. You've never been the type to rely on us anyway. So why are you making such a thing of this now? Her words stunned me into silence. I'd always felt the favoritism, of course. It was a constant hum in the background of my life. But hearing her say it so casually, like it was a fundamental truth, broke something inside me. It's my wedding, Mom, I said finally, my voice barely a whisper. I wanted you there, because I thought maybe, for once, you'd care. Amelia will support you, she said, brushing me off as if I were a minor inconvenience. She's a strong girl. You don't need us. I hung up without another word. There was nothing left to say. The chasm between us was too wide, the resentment too deeply ingrained. That night, I sat with Amelia and told her everything. I didn't sugarcoat it. I didn't try to minimize the pain. I laid it all bare. The years of neglect, the constant comparisons to Leo, the crushing realization that my parents would never truly see me. She didn't try to fix it. She didn't tell me it was going to be okay, because it wasn't. Instead, she wrapped her arms around me and whispered, "We'll make this day ours. It'll be beautiful, Daniel, and it'll be full of love, even if they're not there." Her words stayed with me. If my parents didn't want to be a part of my life, I couldn't force them. But I had Amelia, and that was enough. The weight of that realization, of finally accepting the truth, was heavy, but also strangely liberating. The next 4 days were a blur of emotions. I went back and forth in my head, torturing myself with hypotheticals. Should I confront them one more time? Should I try to guilt them into showing up? Should I write a scathing letter detailing all the ways they had failed me? But every time I thought about that last phone call with my mom, the way she brushed off my wedding like it was just another weekend chore, something inside me hardened. A resolve began to form, a determination to protect myself from further pain. Amelia noticed the change. She always did. "You can't keep letting them take pieces of you, Daniel," she said one night as we sat together, sorting through seating charts. "You've given them every chance to show up for you. It's not your job to keep fixing this." She was right, of course. She always is. But knowing it didn't make it easier. It just made it necessary. I wrote a long, rambling message to my parents. I poured out everything I wanted to say, all the pent-up anger and resentment and disappointment. I told them how much it hurt to be sidelined my entire life, how I had hoped this wedding could have been a chance to start fresh, to build a real relationship, how their absence would be just one more reminder that I never truly mattered to them. But I never sent it. Instead, I deleted their names from the guest list. It felt strange, like closing a door I wasn't sure I wanted to close. But it also felt freeing. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for their approval. I wasn't holding my breath, hoping for a flicker of recognition. The next few weeks flew by in a whirlwind of wedding preparations. Amelia and I threw ourselves into the details, picking out flowers, finalizing the menu, writing our vows. We spent hours laughing and crying and supporting each other through the inevitable stresses and anxieties. And the more we focused on each other, the less space there was for the hurt. I wouldn't say I was over it, far from it, but I was learning to let go, to accept the reality of my relationship with my parents, and to build a life that wasn't defined by their absence. The morning of the wedding arrived cloaked in an unexpected sense of calm. After weeks of emotional turmoil and frantic preparations, a strange stillness settled over me. It was like I had finally accepted the situation, relinquished control, and surrendered to the moment. The garden venue looked perfect, just as Amelia and I had envisioned. The flowers were in full bloom, their vibrant colors painting a breathtaking backdrop. The chairs were arranged in neat rows, facing a beautifully decorated archway. The sun filtered softly through the trees, casting a warm golden glow over everything. My best man, Jason, arrived early, bustling around with an air of nervous energy. He was a whirlwind of pep talks and last-minute errands, determined to ensure everything went smoothly. He clapped me on the back as we straightened our ties in front of the mirror. "You good, man?" he asked, giving me a knowing look. He didn't need to elaborate. He knew all about my parents. He had been my confidant and sounding board throughout the entire ordeal. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Yeah, I'm good." And for the first time, I actually believed it. The ceremony was beautiful. As I stood there waiting for Amelia to walk down the aisle, a wave of emotion washed over me. Fear, excitement, anticipation, and a profound sense of gratitude. And then I saw her. Amelia, radiant in her white dress, her smile lighting up the entire garden. She floated towards me, her eyes locked on mine, and for a moment, everything else faded away. The meticulously planned decorations, the anxious guests, even the lingering pain of my parents' absence. All that mattered was her. As she reached my side, I took her hand, her touch grounding me in the present. I glanced at her, a silent promise passing between us. Today was about us. When we exchanged vows, my voice wavered, but not because of nerves. It was because I was overwhelmed by the depth of my love for her. I couldn't stop thinking about how lucky I was to have her in my life. She was my anchor, my home, the person who saw me for who I truly was and loved me anyway. I choked back tears as I spoke the words I had carefully crafted, promising to love and cherish her for all eternity. And as she repeated her vows, her voice filled with emotion, I knew I was making the best decision of my life. After the ceremony, we moved to the reception area. Laughter and music filled the air as friends and family toasted to our future. It was everything I had ever hoped for, except for that small, nagging thought in the back of my mind. My parents weren't there, and they didn't care. When Amelia and I had our first dance, I felt a bittersweet mix of emotions. I was happy, more than I thought possible. But there was a hole, a void I couldn't ignore. I knew my parents should have been there, witnessing this moment, sharing in our joy. But instead of dwelling on it, I focused on Amelia. On the way her hands felt in mine. On the way she looked at me, like I was the only person in the world. Jason gave a speech after the dance, joking about how long it took me to propose and how Amelia had always been too good for me. The crowd laughed, and I laughed along with them, but my mind kept drifting back to my parents. It wasn't until I looked at Amelia, sitting beside me with a smile that radiated love and support, that I realized something profound. The family I had always wanted wasn't the one I was born into. It was the one I was building with her. A family built on love, respect, and mutual support. I let the thought settle, washing over me like a warm wave. And for the first time in weeks, the weight on my chest started to lift. The reception was in full swing. I did my best to stay in the moment, to soak in the joy and celebrate with the people who had come to support us. Friends and family crowded the dance floor, swaying to the music. The air buzzed with laughter and cheerful conversation. Still, I couldn't help but glance at the 2 empty chairs at the edge of the room, the ones I had reserved for my parents. For a second, the familiar pang of hurt crept back in. I imagined them sitting there, watching me with even a fraction of pride or love. But the image felt hollow, like a faded photograph. Then I let my gaze sweep back across the room, and something else caught my attention. Amelia's family was all there, fully present and engaged. Her dad stood near the bar, chatting animatedly with one of my friends. Her mom was seated with my cousins, swapping stories and trading jokes like they'd known each other for years. They had welcomed me into their family with open arms, treating me like one of their own. And then there was Amelia herself, spinning in circles on the dance floor with her little niece, her laughter cutting through the noise like a beacon of light. A beacon that led straight back to my heart. It hit me then. What I had spent years chasing wasn't what I truly needed. I had family here, not the ones who had let me down time and time again, but the ones who chose to show up, the ones who cared enough to be a part of my life. The pain didn't disappear entirely. It probably never would. But as I watched Amelia beam with joy, surrounded by people who genuinely loved us. I realized that the absence of my parents didn't define this day. It wasn't about them anymore. It was about us, about the love we shared, the future we were building, and the family we were creating. After the speeches and dances were over, I found myself alone for a moment. The reception was winding down. Guests were scattered in small groups, catching their breath and savoring the last moments of the celebration. Amelia was off talking with her mom, their heads bent together in earnest conversation. I stepped outside to catch my own breath. The cool night air was a welcome relief from the warmth and excitement inside. I sat on a bench under the soft glow of the garden lights, letting the peace of the night settle over me. My thoughts drifted back to the message I had written to my parents weeks ago, the one I had poured my heart into, detailing all my pain and longing. I had never sent it. At the time, I didn't think it would make a difference. But now, sitting there in my wedding suit, surrounded by the love of friends and Amelia's family, I wondered if I should have. I pulled out my phone and opened the draft. The words stared back at me, raw and vulnerable. For a moment, I considered hitting send, thinking maybe, just maybe, this time they would understand. Maybe they would finally see what they had missed. But as I reread the message, something shifted within me. What was I really hoping to achieve? Would they suddenly change? Would they magically become the supportive, loving parents I had always craved? Or would I be left waiting for an apology that would never come? The truth settled over me like a weight lifted. I didn't need their validation anymore. Their absence didn't define me. I had built a beautiful life with Amelia, surrounded by people who loved and cherished me. That was enough. More than enough. With a decisive swipe, I deleted the draft. It wasn't an act of giving up. It was an act of letting go, of releasing the hope that had been clinging to me for so long and embracing the reality of my present. A few minutes later, Amelia came looking for me. Her hand found mine, her smile lighting up the night. "Ready to head back in?" she asked softly, her eyes filled with concern. I squeezed her hand and stood up, the weight in my chest finally starting to lift. "Yeah," I said. "Let's go." When Amelia and I returned to the reception, the energy in the room immediately pulled me back into the moment. The music had slowed down and a few couples were swaying together on the dance floor under the soft glow of string lights. It was simple, understated, and perfect. Everything we had hoped for. We joined the remaining guests, sinking into a comfortable rhythm of conversation and shared laughter. Amelia leaned into me, resting her head on my shoulder. "You okay?" she asked softly, her voice barely audible over the music. I nodded, a genuine smile spreading across my face. "I am," I said, and I meant it. It wasn't that the pain was gone, far from it. I still felt the sting of my parents' absence, the ache of knowing they hadn't thought my wedding was worth their time. But as I looked around the room at the faces of the people who had come to celebrate with us, I realized that their absence didn't define this day. Jason caught my eye from across the room and raised his glass in a silent toast, a gesture of unwavering support. Amelia's dad, who had practically adopted me as his own, was deep in conversation with my uncle, their faces alight with laughter. Her mom waved at me from the dessert table, a plate piled high with cake in her hand, a clear invitation to indulge. This was family. Not perfect, not always easy, but real. A tapestry woven with love, loyalty, and unwavering support. The DJ announced the last song of the night, a slow, romantic ballad that had always been our song. Amelia pulled me to my feet. We joined the few remaining couples on the dance floor, her arms slipping around my neck as we swayed to the music. "You know," she said, her voice warm and breathy. "This was perfect." I smiled, my forehead resting against hers. "Yeah," I said. "It really was." As the song ended and the guests clapped, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't expected. This was the start of something new. A life built with Amelia, surrounded by people who cared. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like that was enough. The reception ended and Amelia and I stood at the entrance, saying goodbye to the last of the guests. Hugs were exchanged, promises to stay in touch were made, and heartfelt congratulations were offered. The night had been beautiful, better than I ever imagined. And despite everything with my parents, I felt content. We were gathering our things to head back to the car when Jason came running up to me, his face a mix of confusion and concern. "Hey man," he said, catching his breath. "You're not going to believe this, but your parents are outside." I froze. "What?" Jason nodded, his expression incredulous. "Yeah. They've been sitting in their car for the past hour. I saw them earlier, but I thought maybe they were just passing by. They didn't come in, though. They're still out there." My heart raced. 1,000 emotions swirled in my chest. Anger, confusion, hope, disbelief. Why were they here? After all their excuses, all their indifference, why bother showing up now? I glanced at Amelia. She placed a steadying hand on my arm, her eyes searching mine. "What do you want to do?" she asked gently, her voice filled with unwavering support. I took a deep breath, trying to regain control. "I'll talk to them," I said finally, my voice surprisingly calm. Amelia squeezed my hand. "I'll wait for you." I stepped outside, the cool night air hitting my face as I approached the dark car parked a few spaces away. The windows were up, but I could see them inside. My dad in the driver's seat, my mom sitting stiffly beside him. They looked uncomfortable, out of place. When I tapped on the window, my dad rolled it down halfway. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. My mom glanced at my dad, then back at me, her expression unreadable. "We thought we'd stop by," she said, her tone hesitant, "just to see how it went." I blinked, stunned by the audacity of her words. "You've been sitting out here for an hour? Why didn't you come in?" My dad shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "We didn't want to cause a scene." "A scene?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You didn't even RSVP. You told me this wasn't important enough for you, and now you're just sitting here like spectators?" My mom sighed, her face a mix of guilt and something else, something that looked suspiciously like pride swallowed too late. "We didn't know how to come," she said, her voice quieter now. "We thought it would upset you." "It upsets me more that you didn't even try," I shot back, the anger bubbling to the surface. "Do you have any idea how humiliating it was to explain your absence to people who actually cared enough to show up?" My dad shifted uncomfortably, gripping the steering wheel. "We just wanted to see you happy," he said finally, his voice barely audible. I shook my head, taking a step back. "Then you should have been there. You missed it, all of it." I turned and walked away before they could say another word. Whatever their reason for being there, it didn't change anything. It didn't erase the years of neglect or the casual cruelty they had inflicted. Amelia was waiting for me by the door, her eyes searching mine as I approached. "Well?" she asked, her voice gentle. "They stayed in the car," I said, my voice flat. "They didn't come in." Amelia pulled me into a hug, and I let myself melt into her warmth, grateful for her unwavering support. Whatever had brought my parents here, it didn't matter anymore. The people who cared were the ones who showed up, the ones who celebrated our love and embraced us with open hearts. As we drove away from the venue, the weight I'd been carrying for so long began to lift. Amelia sat beside me, her hand warm in mine, her head resting gently on my shoulder. The events of the night replayed in my mind. The laughter, the tears, the heartfelt toasts, the realization that I had a family who truly cared. I thought about my parents one last time, sitting alone in their car, watching my happiness from a distance, but instead of anger or hurt, I felt a sense of acceptance. They had made their choices, and I had made mine. I couldn't change them, but I could choose how much power their actions had over me. The days that followed were filled with joy. Amelia and I settled into our new life together, building our own traditions and surrounding ourselves with people who uplifted us. Her family embraced me wholeheartedly, and my circle of friends became an even stronger source of support. One afternoon, as we unpacked boxes in our new home, Amelia found an old photo of me as a child. I was grinning ear to ear, holding a toy airplane. She smiled and placed it on the mantel, next to a photo from our wedding. "That's the happiness I see in you now," she said softly. "The kind of happiness that comes from being surrounded by love and support." I realized she was right. For so long, I'd been chasing approval from people who were incapable of giving it. But now, I was focusing on the love and happiness that was right in front of me. Life wasn't perfect. There were still moments of sadness, moments when I missed the parents I wished I had. But those moments were becoming fewer and farther between. Life was ours, and that was enough.